You're listening to the Greeks Gridiron, live with Ethan Haristadoulou.
What's going on, everyone, and welcome back to more of the Greeks Gridiron. I am Ethan Haristadoulou, and today on this July 22nd, 2022, I am going through divisional power rankings for the NFC North, breaking down all four teams and ranking them from 4 to 1. We'll obviously start from the bottom and work our way up to the top. So make sure you hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, and most importantly, comment down below. How would you rank the NFC North? Are you a fan of any of these four teams or maybe an outsider looking in? Let me know how you would rank these four teams. Give me some reasons why, you believe some teams should be at the top of the bottom and everything in between, and we'll have a nice discussion about it. But starting off at the bottom, at the number 4 spot here, this team has had a lot of turnover this year just in terms of, new coaching staff, new players coming in, what have you, players going out, and I feel that it's very hard for me to justify them being any higher with so many questions to be asked, more so than answers, and that is the Chicago Bears. Now, I would love for them to be higher than this, and you could potentially argue that, they could definitely challenge a team, work in that bottom half, maybe for the number 3 spot, but with a new coaching staff coming in, and I don't want to say uncertainty around Justin Fields, but we can't sit here and act like first season was not great, but there's a lot to blame. Poor offensive line play, coaching staff that was around him, not necessarily having the playmaking ability around him either. I mean, Mooney was probably the best player on the field for the Bears. That wasn't Justin Fields when he was giving it his all to try to win the few games that he had the opportunity to play in, but I just think that there's more questions than answers with this Bears team right now, and I can't really fit them above anyone else here. I will say this, though. I do really like some of the players they got in the top side of their draft class. Cornerback Kyler Gordon should be huge for them. Safety Jaquan Brisker literally feels like a Bear-type player. And wide receiver Velus Jones will be a fun one to watch as well. So there's going to be a lot of questions that need to be answered going into the season, and a few of them being, can Mooney double down on his first season being very good as a rookie? Can a guy like Velus Jones that you bring in from the draft, can he make an impact? How does this team look minus Allen Robinson? How do some of the free agent signings look? Like Byron Pringle, bringing him in from the Chiefs, or, Justin Jones, the D tackle. Does he fortify the interior of the line? Guard Lucas Patrick, can the offensive line look any better this year than it did last year despite losing James Daniels? I think that there's just a lot more questions than answers here, and then obviously one of the bigger ones, how does Eberflus take control of this team, and what does the 2022 Bears look underneath his control? That'll be probably one of the biggest answers, considering I feel coaching was probably the Bears' biggest problem the last few seasons. So a lot to be asked. And I think one of the other big questions to keep in mind, too, the loss of Khalil Mack. And you can argue he might not have been himself the last couple of seasons or so, the Khalil Mack dominant one that, first came into Chicago after being traded from the Raiders a while back. But he still was a force to be reckoned with and a guy that offenses needed to account for. So ultimately, a lot that needs to be answered with the Bears, and I just have a hard time placing them above the number 4 spot here. Coming in at the number 3 position, and I will say I had a little bit of a tough time kind of ranking 3, 2, and 1 because there are a lot of variables with every single one of these teams aside from the Bears, and I settled on the Lions at number 3, and this is not necessarily one that I'm super sold on because, and I've heard a lot of people say this, and I felt like I was saying this all last year as well. The Lions last year, despite how little they had on the roster in terms of supreme talent, they were one of the most competitive 3-win teams I have ever seen. They were taking playoff teams to the absolute brink. I mean, you saw them play the Rams the way they did. They were throwing everything and the kitchen sink at the Rams to try to win that game for Jared Goff. And the game was close. The scoreline looked further apart than the actual in-game play and what was going on up until the very final few minutes of the game there. This was a really competitive team, a team that seems to absolutely love Dan Campbell, and I feel like, the air is a little bit different in Detroit this season. It's not the Detroit feeling that we usually have going in every year where I feel like I can write off the Lions year in and year out, even when they had Matthew Stafford. Something feels different about this. You got Aiden Hutchinson Jamison Williams coming in, 2 studs on both sides of the ball. I really like the end Joshua Pascal as well. And safety Kirby Joseph is another great addition as well. So a lot of good young talent coming in from the draft. Free agent signings. DJ Chark, another playmaker for Jared Goff to throw the football to alongside Jamison Williams. Cornerback Mike Hughes. I mean, there's a lot that I think this team has that can really shock some people. And I wouldn't put it past the Lions to win 7, 8, maybe 9, maybe even 10 games if all really falls in their favor. This is a dark horse team. I don't want to say to necessarily make the playoffs, but a dark horse team to just win a lot more games than people would probably expect considering how young the roster is and, second year with Dan Campbell. And the cabinets were pretty barren when he got there, so there's been a lot of work to do. But if this draft class, who, like I said, those 4 guys I named, if those guys can all hit and produce and be a part of this team in a significant manner, I mean, Jared Goff might not be as good as some people used to think he was. You think back to like that Chiefs-Rams game where the Rams outdueled the Chiefs and won like 54-52 or whatever the final score was for that game. But he's competent enough to lead a solid unit, and I think that the Lions could be a little bit competitive this year. And yeah, I have them at number 3, but would I be shocked to see them as the number 2 team in this division at the end of the year? Not really. A little bit, but maybe not as shocked as some people would expect. Coming in at the number 2 spot, and I will say that while I struggled a little bit with who I wanted at number 3, I really struggled deciding between 1 and 2 here. And when you look at the Vikings and the Packers, both of these teams have had a lot go on just this last year alone. Obviously, Packers losing Devonte Adams. The Vikings, retooled the defense last offseason. Did not really work out for them. I remember when I did this last year, I'm pretty sure I ranked it out Packers, Vikings, Bears, Lions. And now I'm looking at Bears at the bottom, Lions, and now trying to decide between these 2 teams. I put the Vikings at 2 last year. And all I kept hearing from Vikings fans was, "You're wrong. Our defense is retooled. Xavier Woods. This is a blah blah blah. Danielle Hunter's coming back. All this nonsense." And listen, it's another offseason of some big additions for the Vikings, but I still just cannot put it past that defense yet. So I have them at number 2. Outside linebacker Zadaria Smith. Massive addition for the team. 1, because he's coming from a rival who just played on their defense last year, so he knows some of the stuff that they're doing over there. That's a big piece of it. But also, he's an excellent player. They brought in defensive tackle Harrison Phillips, big for the interior of the D-line. Linebacker Jordan Hicks, excellent there. They re-signed Patrick Peterson, who, while he might not be the player he used to be, he is a great mind that guys like safety Lewis Sign and cornerback Andrew Booth that they drafted in this year's draft can pick the brain of. At his peak, Patrick Peterson was an excellent cornerback. He was a phenomenal athlete and an excellent player in coverage. Now, again, not quite the player he used to be, but he's got a handful of young guys coming in that he can teach and kind of show the ropes to. Even if he's not the Patrick Peterson of old, he is a good piece to have in that locker room. I really like the way this team looks on paper this year compared to last year. But my biggest thing is the same thing I said last year. I need to see the defensive production before I can rank this team in the top. The Vikings offense, without a doubt, has more skillful talent than the Packers do altogether. They are in quite a different position quarterback-wise. Aaron Rodgers is up here, and I don't want to say Kirk Cousins is all the way down here. I actually really like Kirk Cousins. I think he's a very efficient quarterback, and he does not get enough credit. But there's a big gap between the quarterback spot. They're fairly even at running backs. It's just the wide receiver rooms that I trust in Minnesota far more than do the Packers. But the defense, when you see how good the Packers defense was last year and like back-to-back years of just really poor defensive play from the Vikings, you're bringing in a new head coach now in Kevin O'Connell. I just need to see results first before I can put the Vikings in the number 1 spot. I really wanted to. I heavily considered it for a while, but I just feel like we know a little bit more about the Packers. We know what we're getting from them. The biggest question mark is just, can they replace the loss of Devonte Adams? They brought back, We'll get into them in a second, but they brought back some key guys. I just feel like I know a little bit more about the Packers than I do the Vikings right now. Again, a lot of questions that we need answered, but the overall roster talent, far superior from the Bears and the Lions, so I like them at number 2. And then at the number 1 spot, obviously, the Green Bay Packers. I've already kind of dived into it a little bit, but when you look at just the team as a whole, Matt LaFleur is one of the best coaches in the NFL. He obviously benefits from having one of the best quarterbacks in the NFL in Aaron Rodgers. They still have Aaron Jones, who is an absolute playmaking demon in the backfield. You have Randall Cobb, who's kind of like his buddy security blanket type wide receiver, so he is still there. While Randall Cobb is not the spring chicken he was the first time around he was in Green Bay, he's still all reliable for them. I really think that Watson, can be. I just looked at Sammy Watkins' name on my notes over here. Christian Watson, can be. I think he could be a playmaker for this team. He has all the physical tools, and realistically, and I said this when we were talking about the Packers draft grade a while back. If he can just get to the ability of route running that he needs to be at, and get into a rhythm with Aaron Rodgers that he needs to be, I really think he can succeed in this offense. There's still other guys that we can kind of look to like help support the growth of Watson and a guy like Randall Cobb. Sammy Watkins has been a journeyman his career, and while he has not panned out the way that I initially expected him to when he came into the league, he's dealt with injuries. If he can be healthy, Watkins is a talented guy. He has random games here and there where he really shows off, and now he's going to have Aaron Rodgers throwing him the football. Not as much competition as some of the other stops he's had at wide receiver as well. So if he's healthy and playing well, he could be fed the ball fairly well, and he can have some big games. Now, a little bit worried about the Zadaria Smith loss. I'm very curious to see how that ends up affecting the defense altogether. And also, Marquez Valdez-Scantling is another big loss for this team. But really, my only concern is just the wide receiver position group. And when you have a guy like Aaron Rodgers who can elevate the players around him, is Devonte Adams a terrible loss for the team? Yeah, Adams is arguably the best wide receiver in the league. But at the same time, there were moments where I feel like, especially the last couple of years, where the feed Devonte Adams the football thing in certain situations almost hurt them because everyone knew where the ball was going. It takes away the element of surprise because in the biggest moments, you're just going after Devonte Adams, and the defense knows that. And more often than not, Adams could win. But there were situations where it just didn't work out. It wasn't whether it was him just not being able to win a 1-on-3 or whatever it was, because you see the way they bracket coverage Devonte Adams. You get a little bit more of an element of surprise out of this team here. So now it's more of a team effort in terms of the receiving group to show up and stand out and be a big piece of this offense, as opposed to just like Devonte Adams and everyone else. You also have Robert Tonyan, who had a big year a couple years ago. Injuries kind of slowed him down last year. If he comes back and gets close to, what did he have, like 10 touchdowns that one year? If he can even get close to that type of production again, I'm not too worried about it. Defense looks great. LaFleur is LaFleur. Rodgers is Rodgers. He needs to elevate the receiving group around him and not necessarily prove his worth, because he's proven his worth. He's back-to-back MVP, but you want to really solidify yourself as like the top guy, go ahead and elevate one of these wide receivers into that same stratosphere that you and Devonte Adams kind of went through together. But that is my power rankings for the NFC North. I would love to hear what you guys think in the comment section down below. Please let me know. Make sure you hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, and I'll catch you guys in the next video. Enjoy your Friday and weekend. I will see you guys next time. Have a good one.